Joe, take us through the headline figures. What's your analysis about what's going on?
Well, it has been clearly a very difficult night for the Conservatives, as was expected, and we're still getting results in. Only a quarter of the councils actually counted their votes overnight, and so today has been about outdating those numbers. It looks like, and I do stress looks, like the Conservatives could be on for over 1,000 individual losses. Now, this is right at the upper end of the expectations that were coming out over the last few days. Fewer than 500 would have been seen as a good day at the office for Rishi Sunak. 750, it was just about doable, but more than 1,000, that really is a psychological blow. Labour, on the other hand, looks to be making significant gains, and indeed it might be the Lib Dems who are perhaps the happiest of all the major parties as they come out of this recent set, having gained some strategically important places themselves, perhaps beyond even their own expectations.
And so, what are the areas that Labour have done particularly well in that are seen as kind of breakthrough constituencies or areas?
Well, for me, it's areas like Stoke-on-Trent and Hartlepool, areas that traditionally, and I mean for decades, favoured Labour when it came to the general election. But more recently, in 2015 and particularly in 2019, these areas had switched to the Conservatives. Now, if Labour are to stand any chance of winning a majority at the next election, it's precisely these kind of areas that they need to win back. At the same time, you have areas like Windsor and Maidenhead, which the Lib Dems have managed to take off the Conservatives. Now, that again is the kind of area that the Lib Dems in years gone by, you have to go back some time, but that's the type of area in terms of its demographics which would appeal to Lib Dems, and they will have that on their target seat. But if they're to stage a comeback, again, it's those types of areas that they need to win. In the interest of balance, I guess you could say that the Conservatives did hold on to somewhere like Dudley. If they had lost there, I think it really would have been serious issues for the Conservative. And if they couldn't hold on to Dudley, where could they hold on to? So they have managed that. And inevitably with the local elections, because of the strange mix of places that are up for grabs each time, you can point to something that's good news for any one of the main parties. But as I say, it's definitely not a good day or night for the Conservatives.
And as you say, really interesting that the Tories did a lot of expectation management, which is par for the course. That's something that all political parties do. But what they do with that is they put their worst projected outcome somewhere that they think they'll never get near that low. But as you say, the difficulty for them is they might even go beneath that low of losing 1,000 seats. Now, Joe, it's always quite difficult to extrapolate from local elections directly onto a general election. But what do you think the future holds for the Labour Party? Do you think with results like these and swings like these, is Labour set for a majority?
Well, if the last decade or so have taught us anything, it's that nothing can be taken for granted in British politics. What we don't have yet is the national equivalent vote, and that's the figure that geeks like me get excited about because it tells you what we would expect the general election to look like if the performance of the parties was replicated from the local elections. Now, there are big caveats around that. Most obviously, the fact that Scotland and Wales aren't taking part in these elections at all.
Yeah.
But you can have a broad estimate of the direction of travel. And certainly it seems that Labour is performing in line with the kind of poll leads that we've seen them enjoy over the last, 18 months, really. And they've managed, it appears, at least so far, to translate that strong poll performance into performance at the ballot box. And that really was the main question of these local elections. Because last time around, the Conservatives were behind, but not behind as much. And so this really illustrates the difficulty they're in. But having said all of that, the challenge that still faces Labour is, by historical standards, enormous. They, it's estimated, will need a swing at the next general election, whenever that may be, around about the same level that Tony Blair achieved in 1997, which is the highest swing that's ever been achieved in post-war British politics. So does it feel like 1997? I'm not sure we know yet.
And no, you're absolutely right. And it is worth just reminding people, as Joe said, even if Keir Starmer achieves the same swing that Tony Blair does, it only gives him a working majority of just one. So it does prove just what a big mountain he has to climb. And it also is a story about how badly Labour did at the last general election in 2019. Just quickly, two questions quickly, Joe, before I let you go. When do you think we will know that critical national share of the vote? When do you think we'll get those figures in?
That should be by the end of today.
Okay,
And we're getting more and more results in all of the time, and they'll be able to make a judgment about that. But the fact that there are two different ones that are published illustrates just how many assumptions there are around that.
And just finally, quickly, the Liberal Democrats. How helpful is it for Labour if the Liberal Democrats do quite well, particularly in that kind of blue wall area? Is that helpful for Labour?
Yes, it's extremely helpful. I think that the Conservatives had hoped, if not banked on the fact that the Liberal Democrats were, at least for the next election, a spent force, and that they wouldn't have to devote resources and time to save those kind of seats. But the fact that they are now facing an attack on two different flanks, not just from Labour, but from resurgent Liberal Democrats as well, places them in a more difficult position. They'll have to split resources, they'll have to think strategically, and it just becomes even more difficult.
And it's interesting, you mentioned that the Lib Dems surge, as we like to say. Lib Dems are confident of making big gains in Surrey Heath, which of course is Michael Gove's patch, which will be really interesting. And of course, you're mentioning fighting on lots of fronts. The SNP, of course, in Scotland will be another front for the Conservatives to fight against as well.